Fairey Fulmar aircraft didn't just look good, it felt right in the air. Captain Eric Winkle Brown fondly recalled, "There was little with which the most fastidious of pilots could find fault in its handling." This often overlooked hero soared through the chaotic skies of the early 1940s, safeguarding Britain's naval fleets. In the tumultuous Mediterranean, the Fairey Fulmar successfully took down several Italian bombers during the North African campaign and played a pivotal role in hunting the notorious German battleship Bismarck. Born from the rivalry between the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, this aircraft emerged as a beloved and reliable companion. As Brown put it simply, in short, everybody liked it. During the 1930s, the Fleet Air Arm, the Royal Navy's aviation branch, found itself in a bit of an identity crisis. It was somewhat overshadowed by the more powerful, land-focused Royal Air Force. With Europe's political climate heating up and the shadow of Nazi Germany growing, Britain didn't foresee a significant aerial threat from the seas, especially given Germany's lack of aircraft carriers. The focus shifted dramatically towards long-range operations, hefty weaponry, and the crucial ability to traverse vast, unpredictable oceans, especially under the cloak of night or in the midst of severe weather. The Royal Air Force was unwavering in their belief. Land-based aircraft could handle any and all aerial threats. They were convinced that battles occurring beyond the reach of these land-based planes were insignificant. This stance, however, begged the question of why the Royal Air Force wanted to oversee naval aircraft if they deemed them irrelevant. This bureaucratic tug-of-war had notable repercussions for the Royal Navy during the 1930s. The result of this oversight was the creation of planes like the Blackburn Skua and Rock, naval aircraft that, frankly, left much to be desired. While both the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force were openly skeptical of each other's abilities, these doubts seemed well-founded given the rocky development of the Blackburn naval fighters. These new contenders, the Skua fighter-dive bomber and the rather misguided Rock turreted fighter, were supposed to change the game in naval warfare. But even before they could truly take flight, it was glaringly obvious these planes would be easy prey for the advanced German bombers and fighters. The looming German threat underscored a grim reality. There was a glaring capability gap before the fleet could welcome a new fighter. Time was ticking. The British Royal Navy faced an urgent need for aircraft bristling with advanced deck landing gear. They envisioned fighters that could not only escort bombers deep into enemy territory, but also had the nimbleness to chase down sneaky reconnaissance planes and the endurance to carry out reconnaissance missions themselves. But it wasn't just about the landing part. It needed a complex setup of arrestor hooks and catapult systems. Plus, these planes had to be loaded with advanced navigation tools, radios, and direction-finding gadgets. Taking cues from the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy aimed to train observers skilled in navigating those tricky skies and handling the equipment. In a time marked by rapid tech advances and strategic shifts, many viewed the fleet fighter as unnecessary, its potential limited by its own design. The Royal Air Force was particularly doubtful about carrier-based fighters, firmly believing these planes, tied to the strict requirements of carrier operations, could never compete with their land-based counterparts. This mindset significantly influenced the Royal Navy's strategy, prompting them to focus heavily on fleet carriers equipped with firepower, with planes tucked safely beneath armored decks. Without advanced air search radars, the idea of these fighters going up against enemy land-based squadrons seemed laughable. The Admiralty even considered the extreme step of arming their new armored carriers solely with strike aircraft. But those with first-hand experience, the ones who braved the skies and tasted the salty sea air, had a different perspective. The Royal Navy looked to the Royal Air Force's Gladiator. This single-seat biplane, a throwback to an earlier era, was quickly adapted for naval use. However, its fate wasn't to dominate the vast decks of fleet carriers. Only a few of these Sea Gladiators braved the sea's salt and storms between 1939 and 1940. They protected Royal Naval air stations from aerial threats, served as training platforms, and gave Fleet Air Arm pilots a taste of fighter aircraft capabilities. Curiously, the Royal Air Force was missing something the Germans had already perfected: the long-range Zerstor Me-110 fighter. The British found themselves back at square one. But even in these tough times, a glimmer of hope appeared. Contrary to popular belief, the famous Fulmar didn't evolve from the Fairey battle airframe. Instead, it originated from the Royal Air Force's plan to boost its Fairey battle fleet with a fast, light bomber. Fairey and Hawker were tasked with creating prototypes, but the program was cut short. Out of this setback, Fairey's impressive P-434 fast light bomber prototype emerged. Designed in response to the British Air Ministry's specification P-434, the prototype was meant to fulfill the need for a light bomber, specifically a dive bomber. Fairey's design wasn't alone in this endeavor. It was joined by the Hawker Henley and an ambitious, though ultimately unbuilt design from Gloucester. The P-434 was a swift bird, clocking in at 284 miles per hour, but it had to tip its hat to the Henley, which zipped through the skies at a jaw-dropping 300 miles per hour. Speed wasn't everything, though. The Henley, despite its fleet-footedness, ended up serving as a target tug. Amidst these competing designs, a new star was about to be born. This wasn't just the P-434 with a facelift, but a completely revamped powerhouse, crafted specifically for naval supremacy. Specification O-838 called for a fighter that could defend the fleet and adapt to the rough and tumble of naval operations. This meant a two-seater fighter, one where the presence of a navigator and wireless operator was crucial. World War II test pilot Captain Eric Winkle Brown famously recalled one of his nerve-wracking experiences, sitting trapped in the observer's seat of a Fulmar, unable to see anything dead ahead, while your jittery student fumbled for the deck. Must be one of the most hair-raising experiences ever. Resembling the older Fairey battle, the Fulmar introduced a sleeker design and several notable upgrades. Its wings, for instance, could fold and were shorter by 16 inches. On January 13, 1937, at Fairey Aviation's Great West Aerodrome, which is now part of London Heathrow Airport, the prototype P-434, tagged K5099, made its maiden flight with test pilot Chris Staniland at the controls. Following some initial tests, a few tweaks were made, including raising the tail by 8 inches. By 1938, this aircraft earned the name Fulmar. Recognizing its promise, a decisive move was made that year, resulting in an order for 127 units. Initially, the prototype, envisioned to revolutionize naval aviation, took to the skies as a flying mock-up. The Fulmar drew its power from a single Rolls-Royce Merlin 3 engine, a true powerhouse that packed a hefty 1,080 horsepower. But despite this muscular engine, the prototype's initial flights were a bit underwhelming, maxing out at only 230 miles per hour. So the team went back to the drawing board and revamped the power plant entirely. To elevate the Fulmar's game, the Rolls-Royce Merlin 3 was fine-tuned specifically for this aircraft, optimizing its supercharging for low-altitude operations. Along with numerous aerodynamic enhancements to the airframe, the Fulmar prototype saw a significant boost in speed, hitting 265 miles per hour at 7,500 feet. Given Britain's urgent need for cutting-edge fighters for its naval fleet, the Fulmar's performance was reluctantly accepted. After all, being a derivative of an existing model, it promised swift mass production. By the middle of 1938, the Royal Navy was already mapping out an impressive fleet of 127 Fulmars. Interestingly, the Danish Navy also found this aircraft intriguing and considered building it under license. But the outbreak of World War II quickly dashed those plans. Even though the designers envisioned a floatplane version of the Fulmar, this idea never left the drawing board. On January 4, 1940, a significant milestone was reached when the first production Fulmar took off from Fairey's base at RAF Ringway in Manchester. This marked the start of its successful yet modest career. As Captain Brown noted, the swift transition from initial production to first combat missions highlighted the fundamental soundness of the Fulmar. Aviation buffs often rave about the late-war giants like the Corsair, Hellcat, and Seafire, which ruled the skies by 1945, often overshadowing earlier marvels. But if we dig a little deeper into aviation history, the Fulmar, introduced in 1940, deserves some serious recognition. The Mediterranean during those years was a hub of naval skirmishes. Amid this chaos, the Fairey Fulmar stepped up as a fleet protector and convoy guardian, reshaping carrier air group strategies. Judging the Fulmar alongside the advanced warbirds of the conflict's final years might be tempting, but for a fair assessment, let's rewind to 1940. In that year, the Fulmar, despite its limitations, started its journey with the HMS Illustrious, bringing the Fleet Air Arm's first Fulmar squadron into action. The Fleet Air Arm had a vision for the Fulmar, a dual-purpose, two-seater aircraft perfect for relaying crucial observations and navigating the vast seas. This made it bulkier and less nimble than the sleek, single-seater adversaries, especially in the demanding Mediterranean theater, yet the Fulmar's long-range capabilities were its ace in the hole. In 1941, it played a strategic, though secondary, role in tracking the infamous German battleship Bismarck, with Fulmars from the HMS Victorious acting as airborne scouts. During the North African campaign, beginning in September 1940, the Fulmar stood guard over convoys bound for besieged Malta. By the fall of 1940, this aircraft had firmly established its superiority in the skies, having taken down 10 Italian bombers. It even had the audacity to challenge the formidable Italian battleship Vittorio Veneto during the Battle of Cape Matapan, diverting its focus to protect more vulnerable torpedo bombers. Beyond the Mediterranean, the Fulmar showed its versatility in various theaters, supporting hazardous Arctic convoys and participating in the ill-fated Operation EF against Axis targets. Yet, when the war front shifted to the Pacific in 1942, the Fulmar faced a daunting opponent, the agile Mitsubishi A-6M, or Zero. The Fulmar's shortcomings became glaringly apparent, leading to the loss of 6 aircraft to the Swift Zeros, signaling its impending decline. Come January 1941, the upgraded Fulmar Mark II made its debut. This wasn't just a superficial enhancement. It featured the powerful Merlin XXX engine and boasted the capacity to carry significant fuel or even bombs. Tests in October 1941 highlighted its impressive range of 1,100 miles, thanks to a 60-gallon drop tank. Further trials in June 1942 demonstrated its bombing prowess, successfully delivering a 500-pound bomb in dramatic dives. Fascinatingly, some Fulmars were even launched directly from catapults on merchant ships. This strategy was a clever move to strengthen convoy defenses during the war. By 1942, it was clear the Fulmar needed a revamp. Swift new fighters like the British Hawker Sea Hurricane and the American Grumman Martlet started to take its place. Even so, in the Mediterranean, the Fulmar kept flying, defending Malta convoys until 1942. As its role as a primary fighter diminished, the Fulmar adapted to reconnaissance and training missions. Throughout the war, 20 squadrons flew the Fulmar, embedding it deeply in naval aviation history. It claimed 112 enemy aircraft, making it the Fleet Air Arm's top fighter for victories. By February 1945, though, its frontline service had ended. Around 100 Fulmars were converted to night fighters, though their success was limited. There's even a story about a Fulmar being captured by Vichy French forces in 1941, turning the British plane against its makers. Despite its shortcomings, pilots appreciated the Fulmar for its pleasant flight characteristics, excellent deck handling thanks to its wide undercarriage, and impressive fuel capacity. Many of the Fleet Air Arm's aces, such as Sub-Lieutenant Jackie Sewell and Stanley Orr, earned their stripes in a Fulmar. When the last Fulmar took off, it marked the end of a production run of no fewer than 600 units. While it might not have stolen the limelight, as Captain Brown put it, perhaps the Fulmar lacked the glamour that attached to the single-seat fighters of the day. Innate soundness and competence not being the stuff of headlines to set the public's adrenaline flowing.